What's going on, guys? Thank you so much for watching this video. I have with me Denis. You know, he has a crazy testimony. God has delivered him, and he is following God has called him to do. And he's only here for about a month from China, and then he's going to fly back. And I wanted to kind of talk to him about it and see how you encounter God and how you're following in his footsteps, well, Jesus' footsteps. So if you can you just tell us a little bit of where you come from and how you were called to ministry?
Yeah, well, you know, my family all comes from a Christian background, and we went to church growing up. About the age of 13, my parents went through a divorce, and so I moved to Washington State during that time. Around that part of my life, I started getting involved in different drugs and smoking and alcohol. I started getting involved in a life of crime, and at the age of 15, got arrested. Sitting in jail, and I started to pray. And I remember an experience, an encounter I had with the Lord when I was 11 years old, and I was at a conference in Atlanta, Georgia. It's powerfully just changed in that moment. My friends and I, we went back, and we would have sleepovers so we can just pray through the night. I would just read we'd read our Bibles. We would just be so fascinated by the things of God at 11. And I remember just being myself, remembering this, having flashbacks about this time of my life. And I began to pray, and I just started to give my life to God. And shortly after that, I had this realization, and I said, Lord, I don't have to spend the rest of my life here. I need you, whatever it takes, let me have you. And that just started me on a journey where little by little my heart began to be transformed by God's own grace. And when I got out, I went through a couple of different troubling times, but once I went to a service one time a couple months later, it just really powerfully set free. And since then, everything's changed. We've been going hard after Jesus since then. So how did you end up in jail? So this is where we ended up, we were getting involved with robbery and stealing stuff. And basically got finally caught for the robbery and stuff that we were doing. My friends had been caught earlier, they got caught later. I got caught first, and that was kind of. And I
remember you telling me that you encountered God in the jail cell, and can you elaborate on that a little? What happened there? Yeah,
I'm in this cell, and I just started to pray because. Having had that time when I was 11, I just knew how good it was to know Jesus, how amazing it was to have Him by your side, have Him as your closest friend, and so I realized, man, my life, I don't understand how my life got to be this way that it is now, and so I just started to pray, and I just started giving my heart back to God, just giving my life back to God, repenting, just asking Him for His forgiveness, and I remember just experiencing this washing, this presence of God filling the room, and I started to cry, and everything in my heart just began to pour out to Him, and that really was the big thing,
So you encounter God in the jail cell, and after that you decide that I'm gonna just kind of live what God has called me to do. And for a season there, you were kind of like preaching and traveling and doing a whole bunch of evangelism, and one day you just decided, I don't know if you decided, it was more like God deciding for you to leave everything, go to China and serve the people in China, and you've been there for a few years now. To me that seems still kind of crazy that you left everything behind. I mean, don't you get lonely? Don't you do you ever regret it? I mean, it's kind of it's not like going on a mission trip for a couple of weeks. You've been there for years.
Right. Yeah, I remember after giving my life to God, I realized I can't just give a part of myself to Him. I need to give myself fully. Like whatever it means to follow after Jesus, I want to see that in my life.
Right.
And so we would go down to Seattle, we go to different areas where we just serve the poor, the homeless, whatever opportunities were available for us, we would go and serve in that capacity. And doors started opening out for me to go on an international trip. I went to Nicaragua for my first trip, and that's where I saw like the power of God right in front. I've never seen anything like it. I've heard about it, I believed in it, but I started seeing people get healed. We would see things like that happen, and I realized, God, you're the same God that is in Nicaragua, that's in the nations, that you are in America. I want to see that here. So we came back, and things really just started to escalate. I started having a heart to do more missions work, so we started to travel. And there was a time in my life where, after doing ministry school for 3 years, I had opportunity to travel to 4 different nations, and I was out for about 9 months. And I finally came to China, and I was looking at different cities, where to go, where to settle down. The last city that I was in, I felt like God said, "This is it. This is where you got to go." And I was like, "Okay, God," you know. So I moved there, and it's been about a year and a half, and through all of it, honestly, there's been a lot of challenges, but there's been so much joy.
Right.
And in all the hardships, honestly, I feel like the biggest thing for me is realizing that God has made something that's so available for us to live. And I would really, really just say, like, it has been so, like, the life that I live, I realize is amazing. I would never trade it for anything else. I find God's grace in it. I find His provision. In all of these things, I honestly have seen Him in a way that I've always wanted to find. And in the call and being obedient and going, I've seen Jesus to an extent that only makes me want to hunger for more of Him. And
so what would you say the difference is between sort of the Christianity and the movement, the church movement here versus the one in China or overseas? It seems like a lot of people say the same thing, where, oh, you know, people overseas, because they don't have as much, they're a lot more, you know, in tune to hear the Holy Spirit. And what would you say to that? Do you think there's a huge difference between how we do Christianity here and how we walk with the Lord here versus, you know, somewhere in a third world country?
So one of the main differences that I get when I come back to the States is the U.S. is really comfortable. And being someplace like in the nations, I've found that the Christians there have learned how to seek God in times where it's just not comfortable. At times when other people would just not, or they would crumble under the pressure. The people there have found a reliance in God that has been tested, it's grown strong. Coming here in the U.S., I found that it takes a whole nother battle plan to go forward. And from one side, where you need the determination to break from this place of feeling the uncomfort of your surroundings. And here, there has to be a tenacity to break through the level of comfort and complacency and not settling for the status quo of Christianity. So that's been one of the big things. I think in terms of the Holy Spirit, you know, I've seen the Lord move wonderfully, but I've also seen people here who have laid hold of what God says and are seeing Him move in the States as well as I've seen it overseas. So
what you're saying is you enjoy not taking showers and eating really kind of raw food. I've seen the pictures on Instagram, bro. I've seen it all. Like, I'm just kind of wondering, how did you survive? Did you ever get sick? Like, you wonder about that?
I remember one time we were in Nepal and we were in the mountains, and I honestly cannot walk. I am so sick. I am like shaking, needing to hug a tree sick, you know? And we finally got to one place, and you know, like, I fall asleep and they start a fire. I'm sleeping with all my clothes, layers on layers, sleeping bag in the winter. They start a fire. I get woke up in the middle of the night. I said, "Denis, move your bag. The tree caught on fire." And I'm like, you know, I'm asleep, I'm sick. And they're like, bro, move your bag. The tree caught on fire. And I just move over a little bit. I wake up later in the morning, and part of my sleeping bag was burned. But we lost a lot. Like, some of the guys lost like 15 pounds on that trip, you know.
Wow.
So, but it was awesome.
So how'd you get better? You know, obviously you can't really go to the hospital, like...
That's the thing. So I just sent out a Facebook post. We got some internet.
I think I remember that. Yeah. I remember when you posted and we were praying for you. Okay, now I remember that.
I was like, there's no hospitals there.
Wow. That's amazing.
We got to the main city, and I'm like, I go to the hospital finally, and Yeah.
That's
Spend
crazy.
Christmas in the hospital.
What a nice present. What about what are some things that you believed at 16 that you no longer believe? Anything that you sort of realized that it's just not true?
Yeah, one of the biggest things that I found to have changed in my mindset is what it means to be successful in ministry. For a long time I thought, to be successful in ministry means to have a certain platform, especially,
Right.
in the States, there's a lot of a marketing strategy, and there's a lot of the media and all this stuff. And I thought, man, if I could get that platform, that's success in ministry. And I really found that in the eyes of God, success looks something a whole lot different. And I found that to be truly successful in God's eyes means being able to do things that no one will really take notice.
Yeah.
And, I found there's a lot of things that in God's eyes are so valued. And I really believe that there's going to be people in heaven that we meet one day that we've never heard the name of,
Right.
never, we never read about them in history books, but they have greater honors than some of the people that we read the most of and hear and quote their names and sayings the most, because they were willing to serve God in the measure that He had given them and be faithful to Him when no one would know who they were.
Yeah.
And so that for me changed a lot. Just being able to pay that price when no one's looking, when there's no thank you, when there's no oohing and awing around you, but just saying, God, I'm committed to you. I'm committed to Jesus, and I'm going to follow you. So that was huge for me.
So why are you really doing this? I'm joking.
I love Jesus.
It's amazing to hear that, because I think it's easier to say that, but it's not a thing to actually do it. I think I heard it so many times from people like, oh, you have to really do what you say, but then having someone like you that left everything behind for years and is putting up with being sick and not taking showers, all these things. Not that you're not doing that here. I'm just saying, it's definitely not comfortable.
Just so you guys know.
So my question is, what do you hope your life will be remembered by? What's no pressure, but just a small question, like, what do you want your legacy to be? Like, ultimately, I think our purpose is rooted in, how do we go down in history, and what would you say this is one thing that I want to be remembered by?
Yeah. Whenever I hear that question, really what just pours out of my heart is, I want anybody, if they were to remember me, to remember me as a person who loved God with everything, just faithfully given to God, and was truly compassionate and loving towards other people, really genuinely given to serve others. For me, on what that looks like on a detailed or practical level, I want to be a man of prayer. I want to be remembered as a man who earnestly knew God, a person that God could trust and was found trustworthy. I want to be remembered as a man of God's word, a person that when people would come to advice, they would get Jesus, they would get the counsel of God. One of the big things, I want to be somebody who's remembered as a person that had intimacy with God, and that when they got around, they didn't look and follow after me, but they were compelled to follow after Him. And I think I'd be successful in ministry if people can't make it through my sermons and have to go spend time with God,
Wow, that's really good. That's awesome, man. I don't know, that kind of hit me. Well, that's awesome, and thank you so much again for agreeing to be here. A couple last questions I want to ask is, if you were to give advice to someone that maybe is embarking on this journey to follow Jesus at no matter the cost, what advice would you give them right now?
Honestly, I would say give everything you have to follow after Jesus. Give your entire heart, your entire life, everything you own, give it to the feet of Jesus and follow Him whatever it takes. And don't listen to anybody who calls you crazy. There's a wisdom that people give that they do because they care. But there's a wisdom that's God's wisdom, and it's practical, but it's also supernatural. And God is calling us, and those that are willing to give everything, they will taste of that grace that's been made available to us through Jesus. And I would just urge you, compel you, bless you to do that.
So one final question. What are some resources, maybe people that you listen to, or podcasts, or anything that maybe have helped you on your journey?
Yeah, there's a couple families that come to mind, and one of the biggest influences for me is family. They go, last name is Bakers, and they live in Mozambique right now. They have some podcasts, irisglobal.org, and they have great stuff, but their life story has compelled me so much, where they're not just people that preach the word and go on trips, but they're people that live the word.
Yeah.
And when I listen to them, when I see their life, I get compelled to become more like Jesus, to live like Jesus. And they did a lot of short-term trips, and but now they're fully committed to, right now they're living in Mozambique. They've been there for the last over 20 years.
Yeah.
And they've been serving the people there. That for me, I always want to say, God, I want to live a life that impacts a community, that I'm all for short trips, and I advocated for it. There's people that are against it. I think there's a lot of purpose for it. But I say, God, I just want to visit people. I want to give my life to impact a community, and the poor, the broken, the downtrodden, the oppressed, and yeah.
Bro, that's beautiful. And again, thank you for agreeing to be here. Any last words you want to say? Is that, maybe something along the lines of, what's your next kind of step? You're going back to China, right?
Yeah.
And do you see yourself coming? When do you see yourself coming back?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I try to visit friends. I try to visit family and friends every year. This time's been a year and a half. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm committed to be in China for the next few years. I'm thinking, I don't know when until God says move, but I'm ready. Where?
Wow.
For now, I just want to thank you guys for just tuning in and being a part of this. Also, Slavic, thank you for having me. I appreciate your friendship. You've been such an amazing influence in my life.
Man.
Thank you for everything.
Thanks.
I'm grateful to be here.
Hey, I'm gonna actually drop a link below. It's his ministry, and if the Lord is compelling you to pray for him, do that. If you can support him financially, do that. I remember one time I called you and I was like, Denis, I just woke up with this question: who supports you? I remember I don't even know why, and I remember you answering that actually it's people that I know, that I grew up with, and because the whole time I was thinking there's some kind of organization that just gives you a whole bunch of money and go do missions, and it's amazing to see that you're just supported by people that have the same heart and same passion.
Yeah, it's people like that sometimes I would get a call and some friends would say, hey, we just want to bless you, and they have no idea how much that's gone. But just those friends that I grew up with, they have been some of my biggest support. I remember one time getting a call, and my friend says, hey bro, fly over here, I want to get people to support you. He puts this whole thing together. I come there, I'm ready to go to Ukraine. I'm ready to go to Ukraine with no monthly sponsors, I'm ready to go. I'm like, God, you provided me this far, I'm trusting you to go. And I get a call 2 weeks before I go, and he says, fly over here, I'll get it. And I do it, and since then, this just group of friends, there's people who know me, and it's just been incredible. I'm so indebted to the relationships, the friendships that I have in the Lord, and
It's awesome. Well, thank you so much for watching, guys. And if you want to hear more of Denis, you can reach out to him. We're also going to have him this Friday at our church. Until next video, God bless you. Take care.